My name is Trudy Toll. I was born in Paris, France, but only lived there for 3 months. My father went to France and Switzerland to get a certificate to improve his French. He was briefly a French teacher. We left France when I was 3 months old because my father was deported, but I've never been able to figure out what his crime was. I grew up outside of Boston. I've lived in both Massachusetts and I've lived in California since 1993. The title of my story is The Third Gertrude. My grandmother's name was Gertrude Bessie King. My mother's name was Gertrude King Toll. My name is Gertrude Bessie Toll. I am the third and last Gertrude. My story is about learning to love history. I love history. I have loved history ever since I figured out that history was people, people are history. This story is why I grew to love history. My mother died in 1969 when I was 14, so what I have to remember her by are the stories that she told me. Because my mother grew up without a close family, she tried to make others feel not alone or separated, and one of the most profound memories of my childhood was hearing about her work with the Nisei, or Japanese Americans, who were evacuated into relocation centers across the American West during World War II. She talked about her work with the Quakers during World War II to help the Nisei. Her job with the Japanese American Student Relocation Committee was to help get Nisei college-age students out of the camps and back into colleges, or to get into colleges if they hadn't been in college beforehand. She came out to the West Coast during the evacuations and traveled to the camps. The racetracks at Santa Ana and Tanforan particularly struck her because she talked about the families living in the stables, still complete with horse manure. I found out in the 1980s that my mother and another Quaker had saved cartons of their daily files from their time during the war. These files contained hundreds of letters from my mother to students in the camps and their responses. She wrote encouragement to the students, knowing that they would be lonely at times, scared, without their families, and maybe sad or mad. She provided them with a friendly voice at the end of a typed letter. I met the Quaker who was her partner in this project in the late 80s. He was an elderly man when I met him, and he was no longer interested in sharing stories or photos. He had sent the files to the Hoover Institute at Stanford. I went to the archives in 1990, and I saw hundreds of these letters, only to find out later that Stanford weeded these archives. The files that were daily papers in the 1940s had become history, and then they had become trash. My mother lived part of her life separated from all she knew. She learned early on what it meant to be separated from the main, what it meant to be marginalized, even though she probably never knew or used that term. She taught my sister and I to always look at the people at the periphery and to look out for them. Being the third and last Gertrude, being someone who wasn't surrounded by my own family stories, made me realize that history was everybody's story and very interesting.